Naomi Carter's hands trembled as she stood at the long glass table, her notebook pressed tight to her chest. Veronica Hale's laughter cut through the room like a knife. With a flick of her manicured fingers, she tossed a $20 bill across the table. It struck Naomi's cheek and slid to the floor. "This," Veronica sneered, her icy blue eyes locked on Naomi, "is all your idea is worth." The room went silent. Naomi bent down slowly, fingers shaking as she picked up the bill. Her throat burned, but no words came. Around her, colleagues avoided her gaze. Then a voice, deep and steady, broke the stillness. "Enough." Heads turned. At the far end of the room, Thomas Whitfield, the CEO, rose from his chair. His tall frame seemed to fill the space, his steel-gray eyes unflinching as they fixed on Veronica. "I've seen cruelty disguised as leadership for too long," Thomas said, his voice ringing with authority. "Naomi Carter is no longer an intern. Effective immediately, she will take your place." Gasps rippled through the room. Veronica's face drained of color. You can't do this," she stammered. Thomas stepped closer, his words sharp as thunder. "I can." "And I just did." Naomi froze, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She looked at the $20 bill trembling in her hand, then back at Thomas, who gave her a single nod. In that moment, she understood her worth had never been measured by mockery, but by courage. If this story gave you chills, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and may God bless your day. Type amen below if you believe that courage always wins over cruelty. The city of Denver in late October carried a peculiar mood. The air was crisp, laced with the smell of rain that had swept across the Rocky Mountains the night before. Streets gleamed faintly beneath early sunlight, patches of golden leaves clinging to sidewalks, stubborn against the chill. The glass facade of Denver Media Group's headquarters shimmered in that fragile light, a towering reminder that stories controlled by corporations could shape entire communities. Inside, warmth mingled with nervous energy, the sound of keyboards, coffee machines, and hurried footsteps. For Naomi Carter, stepping into that building each morning was like stepping into an arena. She was 24, slender, just over 5'6", with dark brown skin that glowed faintly in the light and eyes so large they seemed to carry an entire universe of hesitation. Her tightly coiled hair, usually pulled into a neat bun, framed a face that had long ago learned to hide hurt behind politeness. Naomi had always been quiet, sometimes painfully so, but her silence was not emptiness. It was the product of years watching her mother juggle night shifts at Denver's County Hospital, of hearing whispered remarks in school about scholarship kids, of biting her tongue rather than give bullies more ammunition. Her shyness had hardened into something like armor, though fragile, and beneath it pulsed a desperate hope that this internship could become a real job, that she could finally lift her mother from the mountain of medical bills and daily strain. Her mother, Angela Carter, 51, carried her weariness like a badge of honor. A once lively woman with a melodic laugh, Angela now moved slower, her chest sometimes tightening mid-conversation. Doctors had called it an early cardiac condition, but Naomi knew the truth. Her mother's heart was failing, worn thin by years of overwork and lack of rest. Angela still smiled, still encouraged Naomi each morning, but Naomi recognized the shadows beneath her mother's eyes. Every time she swiped her intern badge at Denver Media Group, Naomi carried the weight of hospital corridors, prescriptions, and the unspoken fear of time running out. The office smelled faintly of polished floors and burnt coffee when Naomi arrived that Monday morning. The sky outside threatened drizzle again, casting a dim glow through the tall lobby windows. She adjusted her tote bag strap, the one her mother had given her before college, faded at the corners but still sturdy. She moved toward the elevator, rehearsing silently the presentation she hoped to pitch to her manager later that week. But fate had already placed a shadow in her path. Veronica Hale, 38, her direct supervisor in the public relations department. Veronica was tall, sharp-shouldered, with honey blonde hair perfectly ironed into sleek waves that brushed against her blazer. Her pale blue eyes were the kind that rarely blinked, calculating and cold, as if constantly measuring people against invisible rulers. Veronica had climbed the corporate ladder with ruthless precision, aided by a knack for spotting weakness in others and pressing until they cracked. Once, long ago, she had been underestimated. Her family's failing real estate business had left her mocked among her peers, and she had sworn never again to be the one laughed at. That wound had hardened her into someone who crushed before she could be crushed. Naomi, with her hesitations and wide-eyed hope, was an easy target. Veronica's voice sliced through the air as Naomi reached her desk. "Carter, you're late by 2 minutes." Her lips barely moved, but the disdain was clear. Naomi checked her phone. It was 8:32, technically still within office arrival norms, but she only murmured, "Sorry, Ms. Hale," before sliding into her chair. The other interns avoided eye contact, accustomed to the daily ritual. Veronica smirked, satisfied with her small victory, and strutted off toward the conference wing, heels clicking like metronomes of authority. Naomi exhaled slowly, opening her laptop. She told herself it didn't matter, that she was here for something bigger. But shame clung stubbornly, like static electricity. She tapped her foot under the desk, whispering in her mind, "Just get through today. Get through and maybe tomorrow will be easier." Across the hall, another presence carried a gentler rhythm. David Morales, 32, a part-time audio engineer, moved with quiet confidence as he set up equipment for a podcast recording. His build was stocky, his skin a warm bronze, his dark hair peppered with early gray at the temples. David was deaf, the result of a childhood illness that had left his hearing permanently damaged by the age of 7. Yet he had refused pity, developing a mastery of vibration, frequencies, and sound editing through touch and advanced software. His colleagues respected his craft, though some still struggled with how to communicate. Naomi had first met him by accident in the break room when she'd whispered, "Sorry," after bumping into him, only for him to smile and scribble on a notepad. "No need to whisper if I can't hear it." She'd laughed nervously, but something about his calm presence lingered. Over time, he began teaching her subtle signs, encouraging her to use her eyes, her expressions, her hands. In those small lessons, Naomi felt freer than in any boardroom. With David, she didn't need to force words through a trembling throat. She could let her hands speak. That morning, as Naomi wrestled with the sting of Veronica's remark, David passed her desk carrying cables. He noticed the tension in her shoulders. Setting the cables down, he signed slowly, deliberately, "You're stronger than you think." Naomi hesitated, then lifted her own hand clumsily, signing back, "Not today." His answering smile was patient, almost paternal. He tapped his chest lightly, then signed, "Tomorrow, maybe." Then he left, leaving Naomi with a trace of warmth in the cold corporate air. By mid-morning, the PR department was buzzing with preparations for a new client campaign. Naomi sat silently through meetings, taking notes, watching as Veronica commandeered discussions, dismissing interns before they could finish sentences. Whenever Naomi tried to speak, Veronica's manicured hand would slice the air, silencing her. Naomi wanted to scream, but instead scribbled her ideas into a notebook, pages filled with words no one might ever read. Yet Naomi's heart was stubborn. Despite humiliation, despite fear, she carried an ember of defiance. The thought of her mother's smile, the sound of Angela humming old Motown songs while cooking, the promise Naomi had whispered by the hospital bed, "I'll take care of you. I'll make this count." At lunch, Naomi sat alone by the window, watching drizzle streak down glass panes. David appeared again, setting his tray across from hers. He pulled out his notepad, wrote, "Why so quiet today?" She replied softly, "Because speaking feels dangerous here." He studied her face, then wrote again, "Sometimes silence is survival, but sometimes silence is surrender. Learn the difference." His words sank deep, leaving Naomi staring at her untouched sandwich. The afternoon dragged on, Veronica assigning Naomi menial tasks, correcting her in front of others, treating her like furniture. Naomi endured, but her chest felt heavy, like every breath carried invisible chains. She stayed late to organize files, the office growing quieter as employees left. At 7 p.m., the floor was nearly empty. Naomi rubbed her eyes, exhaustion settling. Then she noticed David standing at the far end of the hall holding a folder. He signed, "Come." She followed him into the audio studio where dim lamps cast golden pools of light over equipment. David handed her headphones and gestured to sit. When she slipped them on, vibrations pulsed through her low frequencies, steady, like a heartbeat. He tapped the console, then pointed at her chest, then her notebook. Naomi understood. Your voice has rhythm too. Don't let them mute it. For the first time that day, Naomi smiled. It wasn't wide or showy, but it was real. She wrote in her notebook, "Maybe tomorrow I'll try again." David read it, nodded firmly, then switched off the lights, leaving only the hum of machines and the soft determination growing in Naomi's chest. As Naomi stepped out into the cool Denver night, the drizzle had stopped. The city smelled of wet pavement and pine carried down from the mountains. She clutched her tote close, replaying the day's humiliations, but also David's quiet reminders. She thought of her mother, of hospital bills stacked like bricks, of Veronica's cold stare, of Thomas Whitfield, the CEO, she had only glimpsed once in a magazine feature, someone too far above to ever notice her. Still, she whispered to herself as she crossed the empty street toward the bus stop, "I will stay. I will fight to be more than invisible." The words trembled, but they existed. And for Naomi Carter, that was the beginning. The rain had passed, leaving Denver washed in pale sunlight that seeped through the skyscrapers and lingered on puddles along the curbs. Inside Denver Media Group's sleek headquarters, the glass walls gleamed so brightly that the lobby almost looked sterile, a shrine to ambition and reputation. Monday bled into Tuesday with its usual urgency. Interns carrying folders, senior managers hurrying to early briefings, the clink of coffee mugs in the break room. Naomi Carter arrived earlier than usual, determined to make herself useful before Veronica Hale could find fault. Her reflection in the elevator doors looked small, her dark skin framed by a simple gray sweater and modest slacks. She clutched her worn notebook, pages filled with sketches and scribbled strategies like a lifeline. Today, she had promised herself, she would finally share her idea for a community outreach campaign, a project that aimed to partner with local schools and libraries to amplify voices from underrepresented neighborhoods. It wasn't just a campaign to her. It was a way to honor her mother Angela's sacrifices, a way to make her work matter. On the 12th floor, the PR department was already abuzz. A long rectangular conference room waited with its glass table polished to perfection. A faint scent of lavender cleaner lingered. Naomi slipped into a chair at the far end, arranging her notebook and trying to appear smaller, invisible, until called. The chairs filled quickly. Beside her sat Martin Doyle, a stocky man in his mid-40s, wearing a navy suit that seemed one size too tight. His thinning brown hair stuck to his forehead from the sprint across the lobby. Martin was known for nervous laughter and for agreeing with whoever spoke last, a survival tactic after years of near layoffs. He offered Naomi a brief nod, eyes already flicking to his phone. Across the table lounged Sandra Quinn, 31, a communications coordinator with curly auburn hair and freckles across her nose. Sandra's bright voice often filled the room, but her humor carried a sharp edge. She enjoyed gossip and sometimes repeated Veronica's cutting remarks as though they were clever. Still, there were moments when Sandra's green eyes softened, hinting at compassion buried under insecurity. The hum of conversation broke when Veronica Hale entered. Tall, perfectly tailored in a cream blazer, her heels echoed as if announcing authority with each step. She carried a slim folder and a coffee cup adorned with her lipstick mark. Her icy blue gaze swept the room like a spotlight, pausing briefly on Naomi with its familiar disdain. "Let's begin," she said, her voice smooth, practiced. The meeting unfolded in predictable rhythms, budget updates, campaign timelines, and discussions about the firm's biggest client, a national sportswear brand. Naomi kept silent, scribbling notes, her pulse thrumming. When the conversation turned to community engagement strategies, she recognized her opening. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to raise her hand slightly. "Yes?" Veronica's voice dripped with impatience. Naomi swallowed. I've been developing an idea. It's about creating partnerships with local schools and community libraries to host storytelling sessions and digital media workshops. It would highlight young voices, build trust, but she never finished. Veronica's laugh cut across the room, sharp as glass. She leaned back in her chair, smirking. Oh, isn't that adorable? Our intern thinks she's ready to run corporate strategy, Sandra snickered lightly. Martin looked down at his notes, unwilling to be caught in the crossfire. Naomi's cheeks flushed. She tried again, fumbling. I just thought it could... Veronica slammed her folder closed, the sound cracking like a gavel. From her purse, she pulled a crisp $20 bill. She flicked it across the glossy table with theatrical disdain, and it fluttered through the air before striking Naomi's cheek and falling to her lap. Gasps rippled faintly around the table, but no one moved. This, Veronica said, her eyes narrowing, is what your idea is worth, Carter. Lunch money. Stick to note-taking. Leave the thinking to professionals. Silence fell like a weight. Even Sandra's smirk faltered. Naomi froze, staring at the bill on her lap. Her hands shook as she picked it up, the edges trembling between her fingers. Her throat burned, but no words came. She wanted to disappear into the floor, to flee the room where shame wrapped her like chains. For a moment, time stretched unbearably. No one defended her. Martin shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Sandra pretended to jot notes. The air hummed with the sound of humiliation, heavy and suffocating. What Naomi didn't know was that someone else had entered unnoticed through the side door at the back of the room. Thomas Whitfield, the CEO of Denver Media Group, stood tall, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, his dark suit understated but immaculately tailored. At 52, his lean frame carried an aura of controlled power. His steel-gray eyes observed without blinking, the way a hawk studies prey. Thomas was a man who had risen from a steelworker's family in Pittsburgh to helm one of the largest communications companies in the Midwest. He had never forgotten what it felt like to be underestimated. Watching now, he said nothing, choosing instead to witness the cruelty unfolding before him. Naomi's head lowered as she pressed the bill into her notebook, folding it as if hiding a wound. The room moved on awkwardly, Veronica resuming her presentation with fake enthusiasm. But Thomas's gaze lingered, memorizing every gesture, the arrogance in Veronica's smirk, the silence of her colleagues, the pain etched in Naomi's trembling hands. He did not announce himself, not yet. For Thomas Whitfield, timing was everything, and storms brewed best when given silence first. The meeting adjourned an hour later. Employees filed out quickly, avoiding Naomi's eyes, eager to pretend nothing had happened. Veronica strode ahead, chatting with Sandra as though the cruelty had been a performance worth applause. Naomi remained seated, staring at the table's reflection, her breath uneven. David Morales entered then, pushing a cart of audio gear. His dark eyes scanned the room and caught Naomi's slumped posture. He tapped the table to get her attention, then signed, "What happened?" Naomi hesitated, tears pricking her eyes. She couldn't bring herself to show him the bill hidden in her notebook. She only signed clumsily back. Later. David's gaze lingered, concerned, before he left without pressing further. When Naomi finally rose, the corridor outside felt cavernous. She pressed the $20 bill between her palms, the edges digging into her skin. Her mother's face floated in her mind, the smile Angela forced through fatigue, the hand she placed on Naomi's cheek when she whispered, "Don't let them make you small, baby girl." Naomi whispered back to herself now, though her voice broke. "I'll try, Mom." "I'll try." Behind her, in the shadows of the hallway, Thomas Whitfield lingered silently, watching her disappear into the elevator. His expression was unreadable, but his mind was already forming questions, plans, and decisions. He had seen humiliation before, he had lived it, and he knew that sometimes the smallest spark of defiance could change an entire firestorm. The city outside continued without pause, cars rushing through wet streets, a distant siren echoing. But for Naomi Carter, clutching that $20 bill, the world had shifted. The following morning, Denver's sky was heavy with gray. A curtain of clouds rolling low across the Rockies. The streets downtown were slick, reflecting streaks of neon and headlights. The cold seeped into bones, the kind that made people hunch their shoulders and rush inside. For Naomi Carter, 24, walking toward Denver Media Group's glass towers felt like a sentence. The humiliation of the previous day replayed in her mind. Veronica's mocking tone, the $20 bill smacking against her cheek, the silence of colleagues who chose safety over decency. Naomi had stuffed the bill into her notebook, but the sting remained fresh, pressing like a bruise she couldn't conceal. She had barely slept. She had told herself she would quit today, walk out before Veronica could cut her down again. The office was quieter than usual, the hum of printers and phones dulled by the gray weather outside. Naomi walked past the receptionist desk, where Clara Jennings, a middle-aged woman with a round figure and hair dyed an artificial auburn, offered her a sympathetic smile. Clara had worked in reception for nearly 2 decades. Known for her warmth, she carried a motherly patience with interns, though she had her own regrets, an abandoned dream of becoming a stage actress in Chicago, buried when her father's illness forced her back home. She whispered, "Rough day yesterday?" Naomi only nodded, throat tightening, and hurried toward her desk. Clara sighed softly, wishing she could say more, but experience had taught her that speaking against managers often carried a cost she couldn't afford. At her desk, Naomi opened her laptop without focus. Words swam on the screen, unread. She typed her resignation letter 3 times, deleting each attempt. She thought of her mother Angela, fragile in the hospital, bills piled like barricades, and her resolve wavered. If she left now, what would happen to Angela? What if the chance to turn this internship into a full job slipped away forever? As if sensing her despair, David Morales appeared in the doorway. Stocky, early 30s, his presence always seemed to soften the harsh lines of the office. He rolled in a cart stacked with sound equipment, his dark hair slightly mussed, eyes alert. He noticed Naomi's slumped shoulders, the stiffness in her hands. Setting the cart aside, he approached her desk and pulled a small notepad from his pocket. He scribbled quickly, then slid the page across to her. In his blocky handwriting it read, "People can strip pride, but not worth. Worth doesn't belong to them." Naomi stared at the words. Her throat ached. For the first time since the meeting, her eyes burned with tears. She looked up at David. He tapped his chest gently, then signed with slow clarity, "Stay." Naomi hesitated, then shook her head slightly. "I can't. I'm not strong enough," she whispered. David didn't respond in words. He tore another sheet from his notepad and wrote, "Strength isn't loud. Sometimes it's just staying one more day." Something in his calm certainty anchored her. Naomi tucked the note into her notebook beside the folded bill. Maybe she could endure one more day. Later that afternoon, Naomi accompanied David to the basement level, where the audio studios were housed. The place always smelled faintly of dust and wires, the hum of equipment, a constant backdrop. David showed her his latest project, a prototype device that converted vibrations into visual patterns, designed for classrooms with hearing-impaired children. The small black box glowed with LED lights that pulsed to music, creating patterns on a screen. He placed Naomi's hand on the console, letting her feel the rhythm. Her eyes widened as the screen translated each pulse into geometric shapes, colors shifting with frequency. David scribbled on his pad. "This could teach children to experience sound through sight and touch. But funding is scarce. I'm applying for a grant next month." Naomi smiled faintly. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's like giving them a new language." Just then, Elijah Brooks, one of the maintenance staff, poked his head in. Tall, lanky, in his late 50s with graying hair and oil-stained coveralls, Elijah had worked in the building longer than most executives. He was quiet, with calloused hands and a gaze that noticed more than he let on. "You two better not be overloading circuits again," he joked, his gravelly voice carrying warmth. "Last time the whole floor lost power." David grinned silently, raising his hands in mock surrender. Naomi chuckled, tension loosening for the first time all day. The hours passed quietly. Naomi helped David test wires, jot notes, and watch the prototype flicker with promise. She almost forgot the cruelty of the meeting, the burn of humiliation. Almost. That evening, Naomi returned home to their small apartment. The walls were thin, the paint chipped, but Angela Carter's presence filled the place with love. Angela, 51, lay on the couch in a faded robe, her dark skin pale under the strain of illness, her once full figure now thinner, her curls wrapped in a scarf. Despite her exhaustion, her smile greeted Naomi like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Long day, baby?" she asked softly. Naomi sat beside her, holding her mother's hand. She didn't tell Angela about the $20 bill, about Veronica's cruelty. Instead, she spoke of David's device, of how it turned sound into light. Angela's tired eyes glowed. "See? That's why you belong there, to find things worth sharing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her voice cracked, but the conviction was strong. Naomi kissed her mother's hand. "I'll stay, Mom. For you." Angela squeezed her fingers weakly, murmuring, "Stay for yourself, too." That night, as the city hummed beyond their window, Naomi lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The folded $20 bill pressed inside her notebook on the nightstand. Beside it, David's note. "Strength isn't loud." She repeated the words like a mantra, letting them stitch cracks in her resolve. Tomorrow, she decided, she would not resign. She would face the office again, not because it was easy, but because her mother needed her, because David believed in her, because somewhere deep down, she refused to vanish. The morning sky above Denver was fractured, streaks of sunlight trying to break through thick clouds that hovered over the mountains. Downtown was alive with the rush of commuters, horns echoing, footsteps quickened against the chill. Inside the Denver Media Group tower, the atmosphere was taut, as though the air itself carried a secret. Naomi Carter didn't know yet that her name had quietly been added to the list of attendees for a meeting far above her rank. She only knew that her pulse quickened when she received the terse email from the executive assistant. "Report to conference room A, 15th floor, 10 a.m., attendance required." Naomi adjusted her navy cardigan as she rode the elevator upward, her reflection flickering in the mirrored walls. Her notebook felt heavy in her bag, its pages brimming with an idea that had once been ridiculed, beaten down by Veronica Hale's scorn. She tried to steady herself, whispering her mantra, "Strength isn't loud." On the 15th floor, the air was different, colder, more polished. The carpets were thicker, muffling sound, and the scent of expensive coffee lingered. The hallway walls displayed framed awards, gleaming plaques, and photos of executives shaking hands with politicians and celebrities. Naomi felt out of place, a trespasser. Inside the glass-walled conference room, a handful of senior staff were already gathered. Richard Collins, the CFO, sat near the head of the table, a tall, thin man in his early 60s, his face angular and pale. Richard's sharp gray eyes always seemed to be calculating costs, turning people into numbers. His silver hair was combed back tightly, his tie perfectly knotted. Naomi had heard whispers that Richard had once lost his entire savings in the 2008 financial crash, a wound that had hardened him into someone who saw risk in every shadow. Next to him was Linda Parkhurst, the head of marketing, in her late 40s, petite with short sandy blonde hair styled in a sleek bob. She wore a crimson jacket and spoke with clipped precision, her lips pursed as though she disapproved of nearly everything. Despite her coldness, she was known to be fiercely protective of her team. A remnant of her past, she had once been a single mother fighting to prove herself in an industry that dismissed women. That battle had left scars she disguised as severity. Veronica Hale entered moments later, tall and commanding in her black dress, heels clicking against the polished floor. She carried her tablet and a confident smirk, the kind she wore when she thought herself untouchable. Her blue eyes darted toward Naomi, narrowing as if to say, "What are you doing here?" Naomi instinctively lowered her gaze, clutching her notebook. At exactly 10 o'clock, the door opened again. Thomas Whitfield, CEO, entered with unhurried steps. At 52, tall and lean, his presence filled the room without effort. His salt and pepper hair gleamed under the lights, his steel gray eyes sharp yet calm, scanning the room like a general before battle. Dressed in a simple charcoal suit, he exuded a quiet authority that silenced the chatter. Naomi's breath caught. She had only glimpsed him in passing and never imagined she would sit in the same room. "Let's begin," Thomas said, his voice steady, deep. He nodded toward Richard, who opened with financial projections, lines of numbers projected on the wall. Naomi tried to follow, but her hands trembled. She wondered why she had been summoned. The meeting moved through reports until Thomas suddenly turned his gaze toward her. "Carter," he said, his tone level, "you had a proposal, didn't you?" "About community engagement?" Naomi froze. Veronica's head snapped toward her, shock and irritation flashing across her face. "Sir, I don't think this is—" Veronica began, but Thomas raised a hand, silencing her. His eyes remained fixed on Naomi. Naomi swallowed hard. Every instinct told her to shrink, to disappear. But outside the glass wall, in the corridor, she caught a glimpse of movement David Morales, leaning against the doorway as he delivered sound equipment for a podcast scheduled later. His warm bronze face was calm, his dark eyes meeting hers. He lifted his hands and signed slowly, clearly, "Trust yourself." Naomi inhaled deeply. She opened her notebook, rose to her feet, and began. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she spoke of partnerships with local schools, storytelling workshops, and digital media programs that would highlight voices from underserved communities. She spoke of her own background, of watching her mother struggle, of knowing how stories could empower or silence. Her words grew stronger, surer, carrying an urgency that filled the room. Veronica interrupted midway, her tone dripping disdain. "This is impractical. It's sentimental fluff. We're a media powerhouse, not a charity." She rolled her eyes and turned to Richard for support. Richard adjusted his glasses, his face unreadable. Linda leaned back in her chair, her crimson jacket catching the light, her expression caught between skepticism and curiosity. The silence pressed in, daring Naomi to falter, but she didn't. Naomi looked directly at Veronica, her voice clear. "It's not fluff. It's strategy. Trust isn't built through commercials alone. It's built by listening. If we want lasting relevance, we have to give back to the communities whose voices are overlooked." The room stilled. Even Richard's calculating gaze softened slightly. Thomas leaned back, folding his hands, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharper, more alive. For the first time, Naomi felt the weight of her words carry beyond herself. When she finished, the silence stretched. Then Linda spoke, her voice measured. "It's unconventional, but she's not wrong. Engagement is shifting. People want authenticity." Veronica scoffed, glaring. "She's an intern. Let's not confuse enthusiasm with expertise." Thomas's gaze shifted from Naomi to Veronica, lingering long enough to make her shift in her chair. Then he said simply, "Sometimes clarity comes from those closest to the ground." Naomi sat down slowly, her chest rising and falling. She could feel David's eyes on her from the hallway, his faint smile one of quiet triumph. For the first time, Naomi didn't feel like an intern. She felt like her voice mattered. The room around her, filled with executives and their careful smiles, seemed smaller than the steady fire beginning to grow inside her. And in the silence that followed, everyone listened, not to numbers or polished reports, but to the possibility of change whispered by a young woman who had once been invisible. The storm had been building since the moment Naomi Carter finished her presentation. The conference room, high above Denver's bustling streets, was thick with silence, the kind that weighed heavier than noise. Naomi sat frozen, her notebook closed, palms pressed against her knees to keep them from trembling. Around her, executives exchanged glances, careful not to show too much approval or too much doubt. They were practiced in the art of neutrality, but something in the room had undeniably shifted. Veronica Hale, however, could not mask her fury. The tall, statuesque manager in her black dress leaned forward, her manicured nails clicking against the table. Her blue eyes, once smug, now blazed with indignation. "This is ridiculous," she spat. "An intern, standing in here as if she has authority?" "This is insubordination. Carter doesn't know her place." She turned to Thomas Whitfield, her voice rising. "Sir, if we allow this kind of behavior, what message are we sending to the rest of the staff?" Her words cracked the fragile quiet. Richard Collins, the CFO, shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his thin face twitching with unease. His sharp gray eyes darted toward Thomas, trying to read which way the wind was blowing. Linda Parkhurst, the head of marketing, crossed her arms, her crimson jacket vivid against the glass backdrop, and studied Veronica with a mixture of disdain and pity. Naomi's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to shrink, to vanish, but she forced herself to hold her head high. She could still see David Morales outside the glass wall, leaning on his cart of sound equipment, his bronze face calm, his dark eyes encouraging. He signed silently, "Stay tall." Thomas rose slowly from his seat. His tall, lean frame commanded immediate attention, his steel gray eyes sweeping across the room. The tension snapped into silence as if even the air held its breath. "Enough," he said, his voice low but resonant. "I've seen more than enough." Veronica straightened, confidence faltering but her pride refusing to bend. "Mr. Whitfield, I have dedicated years to this company. I will not be undermined by a girl who scribbles fairy tales in her notebook." Thomas stepped closer to the table. "Years of service mean nothing if they are not anchored in vision and respect. What I witnessed was not leadership. It was cruelty. And cruelty has no place in this company." He paused, then let his words strike with finality. "Naomi Carter is no longer an intern. Effective immediately, she will take your position, Veronica." The room erupted in gasps. Richard's pen clattered from his hand. Linda's eyes widened, then narrowed with the faintest glimmer of approval. Sandra Quinn, the communications coordinator seated along the side, pressed her lips together to hide her shock, her freckles paling against her flushed skin. Veronica's face drained of color, her hands gripping the table's edge. "You can't do this," she whispered, her voice thin. You can't." "I can," Thomas replied, his tone unwavering. "And I will." Leadership is not a title, it's a responsibility. Naomi has shown courage and originality, qualities this company desperately needs. You, on the other hand, have only demonstrated arrogance and contempt. The reversal of roles is not a punishment, it is a correction. Naomi sat in stunned silence, her chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. Her ears rang. Was this real? She had entered the meeting as an intern who had been mocked and belittled. Now she was being placed in the very seat that had been used to humiliate her. Her fingers dug into her notebook, the folded $20 bill still hidden within, as though reminding her where she had come from. Linda cleared her throat, breaking the spell. "It seems clear to me," she said with cool precision, "that Naomi's vision deserves a chance. Perhaps this disruption is exactly what we need." Richard hesitated, then nodded stiffly, calculating risks as he always did. "If the CEO believes this is the right course, then so be it." Sandra, usually quick with sarcasm, remained uncharacteristically quiet. For once, her green eyes softened toward Naomi. Veronica rose abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. Her tall frame trembled with rage, but her voice was brittle. "This is a mistake. She'll fail. You'll regret this." Thomas met her glare with calm steel. "The only mistake was letting this behavior persist as long as it did. You will now report as an intern under Naomi's supervision. Learn humility, Veronica. You might rediscover what leadership truly means." The room was still, stunned by the audacity of the decision. Naomi felt her pulse hammering in her ears, her throat dry, her legs numb. But she forced herself to rise, to stand taller than she ever had. Her voice came out soft but steady. "Thank you for believing in me." Thomas inclined his head slightly. his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp, almost approving. Outside, David pressed a fist gently against his chest, a quiet gesture of triumph, his eyes gleaming with pride. Naomi saw him and, for the first time, allowed herself a small, trembling smile. The meeting adjourned in a daze. Executives filed out, whispers already circulating, the air electric with shock. Veronica stormed out last, her heels striking the marble floor like gunshots. Naomi lingered behind, still reeling. As the room emptied, Janet Moore, Thomas's executive assistant, entered. A woman in her mid-50s with short gray hair and sharp brown eyes, Janet had the calm efficiency of someone who had weathered decades of corporate storms. She placed a folder on the table in front of Naomi and said, "This is your transition packet. Orientation, updated responsibilities, reporting lines. Congratulations." Her tone carried both warmth and warning, as if to say, the hard part has only begun. Naomi nodded mutely, clutching the folder. Her mind spun, but one truth shone clear. The message had been delivered, unmistakable. Value wasn't found in cruelty or in titles wielded like weapons. Value lived in courage, in vision, in daring to speak when silence was easier. She left the room with her pulse still racing, her heart a storm of fear and hope colliding. Every step she took down the hallway felt heavier, but also stronger, like walking into a new skin she had never thought she could wear. And behind her, the echo of Thomas's words lingered, etched into the walls of the 15th floor. The reversal of roles is not a punishment, it is a correction. The city of Denver awoke under a softer sky that Friday morning, sunlight spilling between clouds and gentle beams that made the glass towers glow with promise rather than menace. The storm of the boardroom reversal still echoed through the offices of Denver Media Group, whispers trailing Naomi Carter wherever she walked. She felt the weight of new eyes on her, not the pity that once followed her steps, but curiosity, and in some cases, respect. She wasn't sure which unsettled her more. Her badge, still warm from the printer, now read, Naomi Carter, Community Engagement Associate. Each time she glanced at it clipped to her blouse, she touched it like a fragile miracle. Naomi stood before her new office, a modest corner space with a desk, shelves, and a window overlooking the sprawling city. She hesitated, then stepped in. On the desk lay a fresh folder marked Community Initiatives, Priority. Someone had placed a single sunflower in a slim vase, bright yellow petals catching the morning light. The small kindness startled her. She would later discover it had been left by Clara Jennings, the receptionist with auburn-dyed hair and motherly patience, who had quietly rooted for Naomi all along. The first visitor was Janet Moore, Thomas Whitfield's executive assistant. In her mid-50s with short gray hair and sharp brown eyes behind square glasses, Janet moved with the efficiency of someone who had managed crises for decades. She carried a stack of papers and a tablet tucked under one arm. "Congratulations," she said, her voice clipped but not unkind. "Your role begins today. You'll report directly to me for project coordination until Mr. Whitfield decides otherwise. Clear?" Naomi nodded, trying to match her professionalism. "Yes, ma'am." Janet's expression softened for a fleeting second. "Don't thank anyone too quickly, Ms. Carter. Titles are opportunities, not victories. Prove you belong." With that, she swept out, leaving Naomi both humbled and resolved. Later that morning, Naomi was summoned to Thomas's office. The CEO's space was minimalist, wide windows framing the mountains in the distance, the room furnished with dark wood and leather. Thomas Whitfield, tall and lean in a charcoal suit, stood behind his desk. His steel gray eyes studied Naomi as if measuring not her fear, but her resolve. "I meant what I said," Thomas began. "This company needs voices that haven't been heard. You've shown courage, but courage must be followed by substance. Your first task is to design a pilot program for community engagement, something we can roll out within 90 days. Naomi swallowed. "Yes, sir. I'll start drafting today." Thomas nodded. "Good. And one more thing. Morales." Naomi blinked. "David?" Yes, Thomas said, folding his hands. His device. The sound-to-light prototype. We're funding it. It will be part of our corporate social responsibility program. Morales has vision. I want you to coordinate with him. Naomi's breath caught. Relief and joy mingled, her chest tightening. Thank you, she whispered. Thomas allowed the faintest hint of a smile. Don't thank me. Deliver results. By afternoon, Naomi and David were huddled in the basement studio, laughter breaking the usual hum of machines. David's dark eyes glowed with an energy she hadn't seen before. He scribbled on his pad. They said yes? Naomi nodded, holding up the funding approval letter. David clapped his hands together, his sturdy frame nearly bouncing with excitement. He signed exuberantly, "This will change lives." Together they began mapping out plans, pilot classrooms, local libraries, training sessions. Naomi's once shaky handwriting now filled whiteboards with bold ideas. David's sketches of circuits and diagrams cluttered the table. The partnership felt seamless, their strengths folding into one another. A few days later, Naomi made her first official visit to Denver General Hospital, not for work, but for her mother. The building smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee, the linoleum floors gleaming under harsh lights. Angela Carter, 51, lay propped up on her hospital bed, her once vibrant curls tucked beneath a scarf. Though fatigue shadowed her eyes, her smile bloomed as soon as Naomi entered. Naomi sat beside her, clasping her hand. "I have something to show you," she said, her voice trembling with pride. She unclipped her badge and placed it gently in her mother's palm. Angela's eyes filled with tears. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "You found your voice, baby." "You finally found it." Naomi bit her lip, nodding, her throat too tight to speak. For the first time, the weight of sacrifice, Angela's sleepless nights, extra shifts, unspoken fears, felt answered. Back home that evening, Naomi opened her notebook. Between its pages, carefully pressed, lay the $20 bill Veronica Hale had once flung at her. She touched its crisp edge, no longer feeling shame, but resolve. It wasn't a symbol of humiliation anymore. It was proof that from silence, she had risen. From mockery, she had built meaning. She slid it into a clear sleeve and pressed it flat, a relic not of defeat, but of transformation. Denver's skyline glittered outside her window, the mountains faint against the dusk. Naomi sat by the glass, badge clipped to her blouse, notebook open, $20 bill preserved within. She breathed deeply, steady, no longer a girl shrinking in the shadows, but a woman who had chosen to stand. In the end, Naomi's story reminds us that dignity and worth cannot be defined by the cruelty of others. Even when silence feels safer, finding the courage to stand for what is right can change not only our own life, but also the lives of those around us. In our daily lives, we all face moments where we feel unseen, underestimated, or even humiliated. The question is not whether those moments will come, but how we choose to rise from them. Sometimes it takes only one more step forward, one more day of courage, to find a door opening where we thought only walls existed. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it with someone who might need encouragement today. Leave a comment below. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of hope and resilience, and let us walk together in faith. May God bless you and your loved ones. May He guide you through the shadows into light, just as He did for Naomi. And if you believe in the power of rising above hardship, type Amen in the comments as a prayer of strength and solidarity.